Hello, everybody. And this is the second of three Christmas live stream broadcasts on Christmas Day. And this is Connections with Tavia and the McClish. And we are really, really happy for you to be here. I hope everybody's doing well and healthy and just having a great, great day. But so this for the second broadcast, we wanted to actually dedicate this to Ashley Capogreco and her brother, Michael Ward. And I mentioned in the last broadcast, Michael has been battling some serious illnesses with a very mighty sword. He is a true warrior and an inspiration to his family, everyone who knows him, to me, to all of us. He's incredible and as strong as they come. And so I did want to dedicate this to Ashley and her brother Michael. So, and one of the things which kind of is a segue to the folks that we're talking to today, there's a couple pre-recorded interviews, but one person, her name is Virginia Chang, and she is an amazing soul to speak with. She is an end-of-life doula, and if you're like me, if you're like the McClish, the goon, you're probably thinking, what in the world is an end-of-life doula? Because I certainly really didn't know. And I think it's important for everyone to understand the the role of an end-of-life doula and how that can impact you. Because as I said in the first broadcast, when we're born, we have an expiration date. We don't get to know what the expiration date is. Now, some might like to call it a best by date, but it is actually an expiration date. We know that we're going to be paying taxes, and we're definitely going to have an expiration. So it's the idea that Virginia talks about in this interview is, what about mortality awareness, right? To actually be aware of your mortality, not a year from now, not a decade from now, which is what I think a lot of us do when we're 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 50, 60, and 70 is like, I'll do that. I'll worry about that later. But her concept is that by actually having the mortality awareness, and she advocates thinking about it on a daily basis, which is interesting, right? Because what are the things that we talk about on this Connections with Tavia and the McClish all the time? The idea of, let's stop stigmatizing and making taboo and keeping these secrets in the closet. Concepts like mental health issues, suicide, and death, because these things are all real. Why not talk about them? And let's help make our life around those things better and more fulfilling. And as I often bring up about this piece from Bronnie Ware, I wish I pursued my dreams and aspirations and not the life that others expected of me. I mean, that's pretty significant. And so part of Virginia's concept is making what could be at the end of life, making it real now so that the rest of your life is way more substantive and meaningful, right? I mean, that's a great idea. I'd never heard anyone use that term before. I think she's not even sure if she got that term from somewhere else. So if it was, I'm sure she would be happy to attribute it, as I would, to whatever the source actually is. And so that's Virginia Chang. She has an amazing website too, tillthelastdoula.com, which has an awful lot of resources for people who have illness in their family, or their somebody they know, or themselves might have been diagnosed with a chronic illness or a terminal illness. So many resources on her website to take a look at. But we'll get into more of that during the interview. And then had a chance to talk for a while with Father Bob Flannery, who is a pastor at St. Francis Xavier Church in Carbondale, or as the more affluent would like to say, Carbondale, Illinois. And Father Bob had some really meaningful concepts to think about when looking at connecting with people, whether they're sick, whether they're grieving. and had some great ideas for enhancing connections for people that might otherwise be a little bit reluctant or recalcitrant to take that step on their own and to do something that might make them feel better and live a more fulfilling life. So that's something that Father Bob does a phenomenal job talking about, and he goes into a lot of depth with, and even talks about some anecdotes from his life personally, and also from Pope Francis, who had surgery when he was 21 years old. I didn't realize that, and was in the hospital. And so the Pope has had a message for people that on how to speak to people that are sick, and there's certainly a way to do that and a way not to do it. And again, we talked in the last broadcast about the lack of skill that so many of us have in terms of active listening, right? And that's what we'll talk to Virginia Chang about, being, or the concept of being an empty vessel, where you are not speaking to someone else, but you're being with them, and you're an empty vessel to hear what they have to say, right? That's important to them. And I think so many people have not had that in their life. And both she and Father Bob, I think, have some really great ideas on how to have a much better connection with people that you are friends with, that are in your life, in your tribe, circle, family, whatever it might be. So we are going to, let me pull in this interview, and I think you are going to really enjoy this. Let's see, that would be, okay, I think we should have that thing in here. So here we go.
Well, Virginia Chang, I am really honored to meet you and to speak with you today. And we're just having kind of a short conversation running up to the holiday. And I'm glad that you're out west and maybe not in the eye of the storm as we might be in the Midwest and the Northeast, although I know you're from the Northeast. But I just kind of want to talk to you a little bit about what you do. And I think there's a lot of confusion, and I know that because I really didn't know myself, but you're an end-of-life doula. And I'm just curious, what does that mean, and how do you approach the work you do?
Well, thank you, Tom, so much for inviting me to speak with you today. I also feel that the holidays are a really important time, not just for joy and celebration and being with family, but it can be a really difficult time for those who don't have as strong of a network or community around them. And so it's important to talk about these topics, and I'm more than happy to be here with you today to speak to your audience. So I am an end-of-life doula. And for those of you who don't really know what that is, I'd like to use the analogy of a birth doula, because I think that's something that people are more familiar with. And what do birth doulas do? Birth doulas guide, support, companion, and educate pregnant women through the transition of being a mother. Well, I do the same thing, but I do it for people at the other end of the spectrum of life, not at birth, but at death. So I guide, I support, I companion, and I educate people through the transition of life to whatever is next.
Sure.
And to try to do it, my particular approach is trying to do it in a positive, meaningful, and affirming way that takes into account that individual's values and beliefs and their identity.
Well, when we talked briefly yesterday, you mentioned something that kind of blew my mind, because it struck me as so significant for everyone to be considering, and that was mortality awareness.
You
said it.
I don't know whether I coined this term or whether that term has already been out there and I just adopted it, but I love this idea. So mortality awareness, what is this? I really can define it as thinking about your own mortality, death, dying, one time a day. So research studies have shown that if you think about your own mortality one time a day, you will be in less depressed moods. You will engage in healthier behavior. And this means like, reaching your fitness goals, going to the gym more, eating healthier. They've even shown that you'll put on sunscreen.
It makes sense.
You will strive to live more positively. What does that mean? You'll be engaged more in your community. You'll begin to think about others. You'll begin to think of others as well as the planet that you live on, the environment. And lastly, thinking about your own mortality has shown that you will show greater acts of kindness and compassion towards others. I think this is super powerful stuff. This is not like going on a diet or paying thousands of dollars for therapy. This is just thinking about your own mortality once a day. And I can say for myself personally that my life was profoundly changed by bringing mortality awareness into my life. And I know it worked for me. And I didn't do it purposefully. It just happened to me because of personal circumstances of deaths. And if you do this for yourself, but you do it in a positive way to uplift you rather than doing it in a negative way, like, oh, I'm thinking of death and I'm like morose all the time, then you find that your whole life begins to be lifted up because why? Because you begin to appreciate living so much more. You begin to appreciate life and every day, and your priorities will begin to change with regards to work, friendships, finances, and leisure time. And you start making different choices in life. And, once you start doing that, you're like on a different path of living.
Well, it seems that people look at these concepts of life and death as they're mutually exclusive. Like you either have one or the other. And the fact is, when you're born, you're on a trajectory. It's not a secret. I mean, we know that. It's like taxes. I mean, to be frank about it, no offense to Frank, but it really is true that that's just something that we know exists, and we really don't have the ability or wherewithal to know when. So I love your idea. I mean, that is just so significant to consider that once a day. And I can completely see where that would have a massive impact on not only how you approach your own self, but then others, as you said, with benevolence and grace. I mean, that's really significant, I would have to say. But I was also looking at your website, which I really like, tillthelastdoula.com, which is, did you do your own website? I was just curious.
I did work with a website designer, but it was very much a collaborative process. I feel like that website is me on the internet. So I really had a very big say in the design and the feel, and I'm very, controlling as to how it portrays me. I mean, that's me. I'm putting myself out there. It was a little bit of a risk.
Well, I could see there's a lot of vulnerability there, right? I mean, and that's why I had a feeling that you were significantly involved in the creation of that website, because you could just tell it's really amazing. But there was something that, and of course you have a publication area, and one of the things that you had written was about becoming an empty vessel. And it says, I can hold space for the words, stories, and emotions of the dying because I am an empty vessel. And I was thinking about how many people, if you took the two words, the dying out, really would like to have someone hold space for them at any point, right? No matter what.
Yes. When I said that, I did use the word dying, but in my perspective, to me, living and dying, as you have just mentioned, to me, they're interchangeable processes. They are so much the same. They are interwoven. We are living and dying simultaneously. Whereas I think the majority of people think of, I'm just living, and dying is something I do at the end. But that's not the way it is for me. And when I wrote that statement, you're absolutely right. We can use the word living as opposed to dying in that sentence. And that is the grace that we should offer to all people, is to hold that space and to really listen and hold those emotions and honor each of us as individuals.
So for someone that really doesn't understand what an end-of-life doula actually does, because you mentioned the birth doula, which I think you're right, a lot of people may have heard that or have some concept of that. But so what are some of the key things that would be helpful if someone may be in hospice or has, a type of illness, a terminal illness or something that they could use the service? What kinds of things would they be able to glean from that? Like if you were their end-of-life doula or someone else?
So end-of-life doulas, we really help prepare people who may have a terminal illness or already part of the illness journey or near the end of death to prepare for that sort of process as well as that final moment. So things that we can do, let's say earlier on in the process, if there's enough time, are things like we can look at life review, we can look at the meaning of life, looking at, did your life impact others? What kind of influence you had on others? And that gives a person a sense of like having left a mark on this world and understanding that, that you meant something, that you had a ripple effect. And that is so important to the mental state of someone who is approaching death. We can look at the questions of legacy, which are, how do you want to be remembered by the people that are left behind? Right. So you want to leave your legacy. This is talking about how you view yourself and how you want to be remembered by those left behind. We also talk about maintaining control throughout the whole illness journey. I think this is such an important aspect because I think many people feel.
Are you talking about empowerment? Self-empowerment.
Yes.
Okay.
But but because what I wanted to say was that so much in what happens to people is when they get a diagnosis of a cancer or something like that, all of a sudden they start feeling like this is happening to me. This cancer is happening to me. And I want them to feel empowered to take control over the process, that there are still things that you can do to shape that time and to be empowered to make decisions and to take control of your life. And don't let the illness define that time, that you define always the way you live, whether or not you have a sickness or an illness or cancer or not. And so then this goes back to this idea. And in fact, I just kind of really wanted to say this to you, is that you don't even need to be sick. You don't even need to be ill. You don't even need to be old to prepare for death, right? And that goes back to that idea of mortality awareness.
Right.
You can be prepared for death at any point of your life, and you will find it will be richer and fuller, and your life will have more meaning and purpose, and you'll feel more connected to people. So, but people really only sort of like live life on a daily basis, and then they only think about these issues when a crisis happens. So,
well, that's true. And I'm curious, when the people that you work with, because in a lot of cases, they are at a point where there's been a diagnosis rendered and, they have whatever time has been indicated. I'm just curious, do you find when you're talking about people looking sort of in the rear view mirror about their life and the positive things that have happened, are they recalcitrant at all or reluctant to go there? Or are they pretty connected with what you're trying to do in terms of looking at that picture and maybe enhancing it?
They're not recalcitrant to go there. What they don't know is to look at it through a different lens. They've been looking at through their lens of my life meant nothing. I didn't have an impact on anybody. Like, I'm going to die and nobody's going to even notice that I lived on this earth, right? But if I show them a different lens in which to view their life, wow. I mean, I did nothing but offer this different lens in which they are now telling the same story of their life. and it changes their whole perspective.
Right, absolutely. And I'm just going to say this: when you change those filters and you change your perspective, I think that people have had impacts on their life trajectory up to and including, maybe continuing on for a lot longer than anyone expected.
Exactly. It changes the perspective moving forward. The trajectory that they move forward on now will be different.
It's the power.
See the past, how it has influenced them to be where they are today, but to think of it in a more positive sense and to have a more positive sense of self. Wow.
Right.
How not to have more peace of mind at the end than to feel good about yourself and where you are and where you've been in this world and how you're leaving it.
So the whole underpinning of this podcast and the show is about enhancing connections and just making sure that people understand the really important need to have connections, right? And so do you see where people have maybe had fewer connections than others, have more difficulty in doing some of the things that you try to encourage them to do because they haven't made like meaningful, deep connections, or for whatever reason? I mean, they just haven't. I'm sure you've had people like that. I was just curious if you've seen a difference between people with, significant family and friend connections as opposed to those without.
Oh, okay.
It's just anecdotal. I'm not,
Yes,
obviously.
no.
Yeah.
I mean, I have been involved in situations where a person who might be dying has the most incredible, strongest family and friends network possible. And what I do is sort of like come into the situation and lift everybody up so that they know how to feel the most comfortable within what they thought was a really horrible, terrible, awkward, uncomfortable situation, and to view this event of life as a celebration. It is a death is a celebration of a life lived. And we can go in there with the idea of celebrating, honoring, and really giving back our love to this person to help them in that transition. And so what you can do is, if they have strong support networks, you can support that network and show them how to support. Now, I've also been in death situations where the person who is dying has very little to no support network.
Right.
And in some cases, it was chosen to be like that.
Right.
Like,
Sure.
They didn't actually want to involve any family and friends. They didn't want to expose their family and friends to their situation at the end of life. And they wanted their friends and family to remember them in good light. That's their choice. Or some people don't have any support network. And so what I try to do is, again, is going back to this idea of helping people to realize that they will be remembered, if only just by me.
And that's huge. And I'll tell you why. I just, again, this is purely anecdotal, but it strikes me that there's a significant difference in the qualitative analysis of connection. So, and I'll explain what I mean. You could have someone that has, a huge family. And in fact, I know someone that I was going to speak with for on the podcast on Sunday, on Christmas Day, because of this exact situation. But then I think she just didn't want to. But so here's a situation where there's a family member that has a very rare type of cancer and has battled it over and over. I mean, won several battles, but it's sort of picking up steam. But the interesting thing is, the family, the nuclear family that surrounds this person, is not able to do the one thing that I read here that you talk about, which is holding space for the words, stories, and emotions of whoever, because I am an empty vessel. And I really think that is a huge issue for people. They could have a million people, right? But if nobody is actually holding space for them in that way, they may really have a hard time because they don't really have connection. And I mean, maybe that was too crazy or too deep to go into, but.
Yeah, I can say that honestly, I have come into family dynamics and situations that were so strife that it takes a lot of work to get them to a place where they are holding that space for that dying loved one. Now, I have to say that actually I've been successful in all the cases that I've worked.
No doubt. I have no doubt about that.
And it's been truly remarkable. But I can also say that I've observed the situation that as soon as the person died and the body was taken out of the home by the funeral transport service, everyone reverted back to their self. And, you know, that huge effort they had empowered and summoned up within themselves to give their dying loved one this amazing sacred passage just crumbled as soon as that door was out,
right.
The body was out of the door.
Right.
I mean, it saddened me that they couldn't take those lessons from those few days preceding to the death to change the way they interacted with each other moving forward.
Exactly. Right.
But, you know, maybe but that's all I can do, right? That's my role in this. And it is really the capacity and the choices of those people to do it for themselves, right? It's like, I only use that event of this dying loved one to bring the people together. But it's really their choices as to how they're going to shape their interactions with each other moving forward. If they see that it's possible, then they know that it is, right?
I also like to think we have, and I'm talking about myself, and that there's sort of this obligation to let people know some of these things ahead of time. Not that they're going to do them or not that they're going to pick up on them. But I think, you know, if you could, just by you being here and planting these seeds, I mean, if somebody could reap the benefits of that and realize, I spoke with a local parish priest yesterday about speaking with the sick. And this is really, it's kind of sad that I brought up, and he had, of course, he knew this, but the Pope Francis had been answering a question of a priest somewhere, something he was doing about how to speak to the sick. And he said, listen, you don't have to do anything fancy. You can just sit there and be now, I mean, I guess
vessel.
I just find that sad in a way that the Pope has to tell people that. No, I'm serious. And this lady that I was talking about, you know, with her, you know, family member who's very close to her, his entire nuclear family cannot speak to him. And he doesn't even want to speak to the family because they don't know how to communicate with him in a way that makes him feel okay, makes him feel safe. And I think it's important for people to understand that they're really, less is more in a lot of the cases. And that's what I love about you just saying that you can hold space for everyone because of being an empty vessel. And if people could just really connect with that concept, wow. I mean, especially at any point in time from birth on. And I love the fact that this entire conversation has really been about integrating both things because both are always true. You're born, you're on the journey. And that all journeys end for all of us. I mean, you know, unless you look like Brad Pitt, like I do, then you may have a little bit of a little extra time, but you know. I was going to tell you that yesterday that I look like Brad Pitt, but I figured you'd see that when we got on the call. But so I don't know. And I know you probably come into family dynamics at a certain point and don't really have a chance to maybe observe so much of the minutia and get into the weeds of it. But I just hope people really understand, as the Pope said, and as you've been saying, you don't have to do anything particularly special as a family member when you have a loved one that's sick, but just to be there.
Mm. But let me put on the little clause that goes out.
Please.
Be there. Be there for them.
Right. And that's the rub, right? That's where I think a lot of the dynamics sort of tend to break down, because I think people really have a hard time with that. And they think they are, but they're really not. And I go back to the Pope. I don't have the article in front of me, but he was saying when he was 21 years old, he had a surgery on his lung. And I mean, he's 21, pretty healthy, it's a young guy, right? But he said people were coming in, all these family members were coming in, telling him how great things are going to be in the future and this and that. And he's like, I really got sick of that. I don't want to hear that. I don't know why. I just found that really amusing, but you're right. I mean, it's about the person, right? And that's what being an empty vessel, I think, is what you're really trying to get at there.
Yeah, it's such simple concepts, but when you can integrate these concepts into your life, they have such profound effects. So you feel like some people think that in order to have profound effects, you have to do profound things. You don't. Sometimes the most significant thing that can change your life is such the smallest thing.
Exactly, right? It is the smallest thing, but it's actually doing the action of doing that smallest thing that can make such a huge difference.
Which may be just sit there and don't talk. Just be there.
Well, what
Not
I love,
on your phone. Don't be on your phone.
Oh, exactly. Well, that's true, right? I don't know if you've seen the commercial with the, I can't remember which insurance company it's for, but the guy that's on his phone and he's laughing on it, around a bunch of people who he doesn't know. And he's walking in front of a car and the car like has to slam on its brakes. And he looks at the driver like, hey, I'm on the phone. What's wrong with you, right? That's how ubiquitous the phones become now. It's like that trumps everything in a sense. I mean, it's sad, but that's really true. But what I love about your approach to this is this global aspect of, as you said, mortality awareness, which we all should be doing. I love the once a day thought, and then the illness journey too that you mentioned, because that is a journey, and some journeys go on for 20, 30 years, and some go on for 20, 30 days, but it's all a journey, and it's just each day. I think being in the present moment too, I'm thinking is probably what you spend a lot of time helping people stay in, right?
Right. And the whole key to this is just preparing yourself in all aspects, to be part of the journey, to embrace the journey. And so just prepare so that whenever anything happens to you, because honestly, you don't know when you'll get sick. You don't know when you'll die. These are things that can happen to you from one day to the next. It can change.
Just like that.
And so being prepared ahead of time just changes your whole perspective of how you're living now, because then you're prepared for anything. You're prepared to live regardless of the circumstances. So you're prepared to live regardless of whether you're sick. That doesn't mean then anymore that being sick is dictating how you live. You are still living.
Right.
And that being sick is just another circumstance. So prepare. If there's anything that I want to tell people is prepare.
And empowerment. I mean, the reason empowerment is so significant to me is, I mentioned to you that a couple of years ago, I was dead basically from sepsis, and I didn't know at the time. It turned out to be colon cancer. And after I got that diagnosis, I went to a local oncologist who essentially told me that, I just needed palliative care and I would be gone. And so at that point, I thought, okay, I'm not going to go through the chemo. I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to die. I mean, that's what I thought. And so the surgeon that had treated me in the hospital which was a massive surgery, it was pretty significant, but she said, no, you need to go and get another opinion because I don't think that's accurate. So I went to another oncologist who said, listen, as cancers go, this is fairly run of the mill. He goes, I think you're going to come in, you're going to do your time with chemo, and you and I will never see each other again. And he goes, I don't mean to be blunt or, uncaring, but I just think that's it. Because he goes, this guy had done this for a long time. So I went through as he said, because of the empowerment and saying, I don't have to just lay down and die because someone said that. So I completely shifted the trajectory of everything, including the mindset. And here, 2 years later, there's all things are negative and normal. So it's so crucial, the self-empowerment piece, in addition to the connectivity with other people and with ourselves.
Gosh, Tom, thank you so much for sharing your personal story. But one thing I'd like to highlight from your story is that in order to be empowered, people need information.
Yes, right.
Right. And information connects into the concept of, oh, I have choices. If you have information, you understand you have choices. And that's where the empowerment comes from.
Exactly.
And unfortunately, a lot of systems, bureaucracy, organizations are structured not to empower because they have a very clear agenda, a very clear mandate, dictates, and they don't give you all the information. And that's one of the things that I, as an end-of-life doula, feel so strongly about is I'm here to talk about all your options. I'm not advocating any particular pathway, but to inform you so that you can make the decisions for yourself, within your best capacity, and knowing what's best for you, given all the information.
Absolutely. And so I was just curious, I know you're in the Northeast in New York, but if somebody from the Midwest or in California or anywhere wanted to, do you do virtual work? I mean, it seems like an odd thing to think about, but why not? I mean.
Okay, so absolutely. So I was doing only, person-to-person work before COVID. And when COVID happened, I literally stopped seeing people immediately. And I never even thought to do it, quote, remotely. And then during the summer of 2020, people out of the blue just started contacting me because, as you know, COVID was desperate. People, the home situations changed so dramatically. And people were desperate. Not only were they seeing people dying in horrific ways, but people were seeing their loved ones in horrible situations.
Absolutely.
Families who never expected to be caregiving were all of a sudden isolated and being put into the caregiving roles. And people were calling me just saying, I need help. I know this is not good, and I don't want my loved one to die the way I've been seeing it.
Right.
And people were just desperate. And so I worked in conjunction with a number of people who just called me. And I said, well, look, I've never done this remote kind of support, but I'm willing to figure it out and support you as best as I can. And so now I do remote support quite a lot. I've worked with people all over the country. I may work with the person who is actually dying up until a certain point, because if they get too ill, then they no longer have the capacity to really maintain focus or concentration on Zoom.
Right,
But
sure, that makes sense.
But then a lot of my work at that point will then shift to the family and loved ones who are supporting that person. Because if I can empower the family and loved ones to better support the person who is ill and dying, and then they give the dying person a more positive experience, then I've done my work. I don't need to reap the cozy, warm feeling of like, oh,
Right.
I did it. Really, what you want to do is to give that person the best possible transition. And by lifting up their support network of family and loved ones to do it, I've not only done my job for the dying person, but perhaps I've changed the perspective of those family and loved ones to view that death can be done differently, better.
Yes.
Positively.
Yes.
And affect how they think about their own deaths and the deaths of their loved ones and their families moving forward into the future, like forever.
Right. Well, I mean, it's sort of like you're creating a different discourse around a concept that's typically been taboo or stigmatized, which is death. And why? And that one of the reasons for our podcast too is talking about all mental health issues, suicide, different things like that have been sort of kept in the dark because people don't know how to talk about it. They're afraid to talk about it, which in many ways exacerbates things. But you're breaking that cycle. I think you're moving the needle in a different direction, which is incredibly positive and just helps people have a better, more fulfilling life while they're living, right? I mean, that's what you're talking about.
Yeah, I know of at least 2 family members of former clients who died that I supported, who went on to become end-of-life doulas themselves.
Yeah, well.
I mean, because they viewed how I treated their loved one. They were so impacted by that experience. They went out and did the training themselves. I mean, what more can I ask? I mean, they will.
You can, right.
I know, and I know of at least one other family member who went on to become a hospice volunteer because that was the way he decided that he could give back.
So are end-of-life doulas well integrated with hospice? I mean, is there an interconnectedness there, or is it something that's sort of like 2 separate paths that like if someone asks their hospice person about an end-of-life doula, is that something that hospice would help with, or people just need to?
They're on a growing curve too. We are becoming much more integrative. We're much more collaborative. We are working together more. Some places in the country are more ahead of the curve than others. So we're still learning about, hospice is still learning about us.
You're bonding.
Yeah, we're bonding. We're getting there. We're getting there.
Right. It's integrating 2 families, right? That's, yeah, I get it. That makes sense. Well, I don't want to keep you because I know you've really been so benevolent with your time, and we really appreciate that. Would you be willing to come back to do a more extended discussion about, because we didn't even touch the surface of so much of this.
Yes. No, I mean, there's so many beautiful stories I could tell you. I mean, a lot of what I spoke about today is shaped by the stories of the people that I have been exposed to.
Right. I mean, it's real life.
Real life stories. It's like, how can you not be touched? How can your vision not be shifted?
Well, and it's sharing that awareness and that information so people can do something slightly different that would have a very significant positive impact, as opposed to just staying in neutral or in inertia, right? Because that's what you tend to do, or people tend to do. I know when I was sick, there is a real strong desire to remain in inertia because you feel so overwhelmed that the thought of doing extra things seems like just one more thing that's too much, right?
Yes, but it's really just shifting it to look at it in a more to realize that, look, we're all going through these things, right? Their stories that shaped me are no different than the stories that are in your life now and that have the potential to shape you. It's just how you see those stories. It's first how you listen to those stories, how you hear them and you hold on to them, and how you let it impact you.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, that's amazing. I'm going to stop our recording right here and want to thank you.
Wow, that was amazing to listen to Virginia Chang, and she has really just a phenomenal grasp on, and I guess because of the work she does, she has a really great grasp on living abundantly and fully present today, right? Which I love her idea about thinking about our mortality on a daily basis, which I think the whole idea there is to extend it. So that's pretty cool. And I have to say that was, she is a phenomenal lady. And I came to learn a lot more about her after we had that conversation. And she is uh, a scientist. Her credentials are absolutely phenomenal. And so it just, it makes it even better. But I do want to thank her for the benevolence of her time and doing that when she did. And I hope that this concept of mortality awareness shines through to a lot of people, because it really is, it's an entirely different mindset. I mean, we just talked with Lori a few minutes ago, Lori Bickle, about the idea of affirmations. And I think this is sort of right alongside that, but in a way that sort of is an enhancement to the affirmations, in that we know we're going to pass on, but having that awareness, I think, is what keeps us being or getting better, wanting to get better. And again, when I look at those top 5 regrets, right, we keep going back to Bronnie Ware, but I wish I had pursued my dreams and aspirations and not the life that others expected of me. And number 2, I wish I hadn't worked so hard. So I think that by keeping that mortality awareness in our mind at the forefront, even just once a day, is something that will help alleviate this issue of having these kind of regrets at the end of our time, however little or however much time exists for us. So, none of us know, which is probably a really good thing. But let's see here. Let me remove that. And as I said earlier, my next conversation is with Father Bob Flannery, who had some really unique ideas as well, and kind of right along the lines of Virginia, but on maybe a slightly different track. So I'm going to pull him in here in 1 second, and I think you will enjoy this conversation with Father Bob. He is a phenomenal individual, and I am certainly very proud that we were able to get him on. And now my computer is, let's see here. Okay, so this should be Father Bob right here. All right.
Okay. So, Father Bob Flannery,
Technology is
we really
amazing.
appreciate you doing this pre-recorded discussion a few days before Christmas. And of course, it's right when this terrible weather started here in Southern Illinois. And I know that you're in the middle of it. We're both in the middle of it. And so we want to get you in and out here quick. And but first of all, you're pastor at St. Francis Xavier in Carbondale, right?
Correct. And also chaplain at the Newman Catholic Student Center, not the director, but the spiritual sacramental minister there.
What is the Newman Center's connection with SIU, Southern Illinois University? I was always
right. Well, it's technically part of their outreach, like other religious faiths, not just Christian, but others that are associated with. It's a RSO, I think they call it. And anyway, so yeah, very importantly connected. We meet once a month, the campus ministers, with people from the university and our own group, and try to see how we can be of assistance to the students and to the university in any shape, way, or form. Sometimes, like during COVID, when people were shut up in their rooms, and we did care packages for them while they were sitting out their quarantine. That was especially before the vaccines were available.
Okay. Well, so in Newman Centers, it's also referred to, I think I've heard it referred to as the Interfaith Center, right?
Actually, it's separate. Gaia
it is?
House, yeah, and I had been on that board for a while because I'm ecumenical and a religious officer for our diocese, and so it's close to it. You know, it's right across the tracks. It is separate, and they do some things together, but it is a separate establishment, which is still very helpful to the community, but in a different way.
Right. And since this is we try to reach people that may be feeling alone or sick. If somebody wants to go to a service, whether they're Catholic or Methodist or Mormon or Jewish or Muslim, whatever, I assume they can come, they can look on the internet and see what times services are. And
I would think each place does, like we have it recorded in our bulletin and on our answering machine. If it's not there already, it will be. Right. And a lot of people, especially in the Christian tradition, will do something Christmas Eve. We have a service at 9 o'clock, a mass on Christmas Day, which is the only one for our partnership with Newman Center. But as years go by, it seems like a lot of people like the evening one because of family events that night or the next day. So
sure.
But even in Protestant traditions, a lot of times they just do it on Christmas Eve, which is fine.
Well, great. One of the things that I had wanted to talk to you about is, and I actually someone else is going to have a conversation with us, I think maybe on Christmas Day about this, but this, when you're visiting or even with family members, someone who's sick, whether it's a terminal illness or just a serious illness, or maybe treating for cancer, undergoing chemotherapy, or just things like autoimmune diseases. One of the things I've heard a lot from people that have the illness is that, people really just don't know what to say. And so they say things that really hurt. I know they don't intend to do that. They don't mean to do that. And I know in your years of work that you've sort of come across some things that make sense on how to work with people that are sick. And I was just wondering if you could share that with the family members and friends.
Oh, sure, Tom, I'll be happy to do that. I think the main thing is just realize that the people are grateful that you're there, even if they might be in pain or whatever. And I think we have to be sensitive to that and make sure. As a priest, I will oftentimes check with the nurse to see how the person's doing, because I may not know as much information, not that they can share private things, but they can at least give me a basic idea. And but when I walk in, and I try to be there and try to be attentive to if they're feeling like trying to have a conversation, or if they need to rest or whatever. But anyway, the main thing is I try to see if they want to say something and listen to them. If it's a family member, maybe share things about the family, what's going on. I know it can be awkward sometimes when the person is, really sick, and especially if it's serious in terms of what to say, like you were saying, but just to let them know that we're thinking of them and praying for them, and glad that we could have this conversation and chance to visit. And sometimes just to be there, maybe just, if you're going to be there for a while and they're, either wanting to sleep or kind of uncomfortable or whatever, just sit in a chair, maybe bring a book with you. If you,
right.
If you can tell that it's not, you need not to say something, just your presence there would be really good. And that reminds me of, and not just with the sick, but just any time, whether it's the death of a loved one or family friend or somebody we know. When I was in my second year of graduate seminary, one of my classmates, his father had passed away, and we lived close by, so we were able to go. And he wrote on the note on the board and just saying, thank you for being there and for your theology of presence. Theology of presence, just being there. So
right.
We didn't have to say any more, just our showing up and being there. And I think it's the same way in the hospital or going to somebody's home who's ill, just being there, being attentive to, if they want to speak or have a conversation, or if they're tired and perhaps in pain or whatever, so you won't necessarily have to stay long. kind of try to read that situation. And obviously, as a Christian pastor, I would be praying with the person, and there's nothing that would keep a lay person in whatever denomination or faith to do that too, if they feel
Sure.
comfortable doing it. I'm sure that what I say is that it's okay if I offer a prayer. That's how I lead into it. I mean, I've never had anyone say no, but so in one way, maybe it's a loaded question, but at least I'm giving that. And, they certainly could say, well, that's okay. I'm glad you came. So, I mean, obviously they have that option. So, that can be a consolation, especially the homebound or the sick in the hospital who haven't been able to be to a
Right.
religious service lately, and they can do their own prayers. But if somebody else is praying with them, as Christians, we know that Jesus said, wherever 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I'm there in a special way. So it does have meaning that way. So it is just a very good thing, just to, try to go if we can. And, if that can't work, make a phone call and see how they're doing. And, you don't have to keep them long unless they're wanting to chat, that type of thing. But just keeping connected, especially during the holidays, and especially like Christmas and all that. I mean, hopefully people will have somebody with them. But today I visited somebody and brought them communion and all, because they won't be with family. And so we do the best that we can, but to let them know that we're thinking about them and praying for them, it makes a difference.
Right. And I think people are so afraid to, they think they have to come up with something significant or substantive to say. They don't know if they're going to say the wrong thing. And from what you're saying, the truth is they really don't have to say much of anything.
Right.
Just be there.
Right. Just be there and be okay with silence and stuff. And again, if you can tell that they just want to rest, and say, well, it's okay if I just sit here and read, just to let you know that I'm with you. And if not, I'll be on my way, and hope to see you in the future. So just to kind of play that by ear.
Have you noticed that too, after there's been a death, and you have the funeral, and then you have sort of the family and friends that gather around and bring food and do this kind of thing for a few days, a week, maybe a couple of weeks, but then all of a sudden it sort of falls away.
Mhm.
And then a month, 2 months, 6 months later, the person who lost a loved one is sort of there, and everybody's walking on eggshells because
Sure.
again, they don't know what to say. So again, is that a similar situation where you really don't have to talk about the individual, the past, but maybe just to say, hey, how are you doing? That kind
Right, and definitely reach out. The first thing I would say is that we're fortunate in Carbondale because our Savior Lutheran Church has a grief program, and I forget if it goes 4 or 6 weeks or whatever. I've just heard great things about it, and it's open to anybody of any faith or non-faith tradition. And so that'd be a first thing to help the person, because and I don't think it's intentional that we kind of forget about people after a while, but just life goes on. And
right.
and so and some faith communities have even a grief support group, so maybe they do it more intentionally, like our Savior Lutheran does. So that's one thing. But the other thing is, and I have read this several times, it's okay to mention the person, because sometimes I think the bereaved feel that nobody remembers or cares.
Right.
And it's hardly the case. It's just a matter of maybe feeling awkward about it. And you don't have to dwell on it, but even to say, I've been thinking about you and praying for you a long time since Sharon died or whatever, and how are you doing? So you're mentioning the name, and then you're just seeing how the person's doing, and maybe they want to talk about Sharon, and so you can say, yeah, I have this great memory of her and us when we did things together with you, and that type of thing. Because otherwise, they just think that they're not. Nobody remembers.
Right.
Yeah, and it's not that. But sometimes they think they're opening up wounds, but no. Sometimes they're just, in quotes, dying to talk about them to someone. Just because they want to keep that memory alive, not just for them, but for others.
Well, it's honoring that person, right? It's
Yes.
beholding that person's existence and their life.
Right. Just this week, I read and I forget where, but when we remember the person is still alive, in the sense of they're alive to us. And
Their spirit, yeah.
And actually, that's a very Christian thing too, because Jesus said at the Last Supper, "Do this in memory of me." He's still alive.
Right.
As we do the consecrate the elements of bread and wine, and so it's actually I have a custom over the years. I never sought them out so much, but was given different coffee mugs or whatever. But so I got one for my 50th birthday, and so every birthday of any friend or relative, I drink coffee out of that, and I'm remembering them.
Oh, that's great.
Day. Or some of the other coffee cups where maybe they gave me them, or I associate it with them, or whatever. So yeah, memory. I mean, that's what makes us human beings unique. I mean, not that animals don't do repetitious type of things, but we assign meaning to them.
Absolutely.
More than just an act that we just do because we were taught that. So that's and so for people that are living alone, I think it's wonderful for them to. My doctor told my mother this before she died, almost 96 years of age. She had her memories to remember and be grateful for, to thank God for, and that really does for me. Whenever I remember these people that I pray for on their birthday, I remember all the good times and wishing them well, asking God to bless them. I mean, just wonderful ways to bring them alive, even though they may be deceased or even though they live far away. They're with me right there in that moment, right where I'm at.
Absolutely. Well, you touched on something a little bit ago that, the underpinnings of our podcast is about connection and fostering that. So you talked about like a grief organization, or after someone passes, to the Lutheran organization that does that. Right. But any organization that has that type of thing, how do you get, or how do you encourage people that are reluctant, that are alone, say, and they've been married for 40 years, 50 years, sure. The spouse passes and they just feel like they're alone. They don't want to get out. They live alone, family's distant. Sure. How have you tried to bridge the gap to encourage them to go to something like that? Because it does make a difference when people go to a support organization.
Right. Well, I think, and I hadn't thought about it till just now, but I would offer to go with them or have one of my parishioners go with them. So
that's amazing.
So that they don't feel, awkward just in terms of not knowing anybody. So even if that person, they would know the deceased just by being friends with or a relative of this person. And so just say, there's this group out there which helps people who are grieving the loss of a loved one. How about if we go to that on Tuesday night, whenever it's being held? I'll be glad to go with you.
Sure.
And then play it by ear, maybe go a time or two, and maybe say, do you want me to still go, or do you feel, because by then they would have met some people and
become more comfortable.
Right. Yeah. And then they can decide, because, most people wouldn't want to, once they're feeling comfortable, wouldn't want to burden other people to have to join them. But again, they may need that. And hopefully the person will be, because again, it's only in this particular case, I think 6 or 8 weeks at the most that they do it. So it's not too difficult, but and just, and give them time, they might need to hear about it and then approach it maybe a week or two later and something. And again, it's not that this particular series goes continuously. They do it several times a year. I'm not sure what, but, to check that out. And again, in other communities, hopefully they have something that's available. And I'm sure online you could just
absolutely
type that in and probably find something. And the other thing is there might even be something nationally that you can, if a person is able to do the computer and do it online, and maybe if they're elderly and cannot navigate that, a family member or friend could hopefully assist them with that.
Right. I never actually thought about how amazing that is, but we're talking about the connection of people doing other things. And this is an amazing thing to just encourage someone to try something and have, provide them with sort of that safety net, right? Of being with them while they're doing it, whether it's online or in person. That's phenomenal. Yeah.
Right. No, it's great to be able to do that. I read another article in terms of the elderly of, people, we always have our goals to get through school, do our career, have a family, retire. But then, and when people really get up in age, in the 80s or 90s, just if they're people of faith, especially, Lord, take me home, I want to be with you. Or even if they're not of faith, they still, it's ready to pass on. But just again, thinking of the memories and hopefully that's why faith communities can be so important. And if people don't have one, that's one of the reasons. It's not to use them, but to benefit from their resources and their care and compassion and that type of thing. But they can assist with that in terms of maybe some ways to be with people and listen to them and let them talk, or just be present to them. Our parish is a little connected to that, but we have an outreach program every Thanksgiving and Christmas and Easter. Those 3 times a year, we have care packages that we send home, and with some religious reading, but also some nice small gifts in the parish that we do, just so that they know that they're thought about and cared for.
Well, that's amazing.
Right.
Yeah, there's no question that connection, when you look at issues like addiction and a lot of mental health issues like depression and anxiety, PTSD, there's a huge underpinning of lack of connection connected to those things. Right. That really make it a paramount issue to try to connect with people, even if it is just sitting with them and knitting.
Right. Oh yeah. And sometimes, that's all they want. They just want a physical presence right there, just so that, and not again using them, but that just, it's comforting. It's solace, and especially if it's a loved one or a friend that they care about a lot, that they you don't have to say words, you just be together, and if something comes up, you do it, but you don't have to feel like you have to initiate something or respond to something.
Well, I saw an article actually a while back, but it was discussing Pope Francis's view on working with the sick, and one of the things he said was, please, when you go to a sick person, don't fill them with motivation, with promises of the future. The gesture of closeness speaks more with its presence than words. And I mean, that really sums it up, which is exactly what you were saying. And that's just, I hope that people can take that away, the importance of that. Right. Yeah.
And it's true, again, we want the best, we want to give them hope and all that, but sometimes the hope is just knowing that we're there at the moment. So we don't have to try to come up with some psychological or theological or whatever. There might be a place for that, but oftentimes we don't even have to worry about that, but just to say how much they mean to us, to communicate that to them so that they know we love them and care about them and want the best for them. And we know if they're ailing, that we're with them in spirit. We know it must be hard, but please know that you're not alone and we all care about you, that type of thing.
Right. And just so everyone's clear, we're not just talking about people that are 50, 60, 70, or 80 here. I mean, and that was the other thing from this piece about the Pope, was talking about his own personal surgery when he was, I think he was just 21 years old.
He lost a lung or part of a lung, yeah.
Right. And he talked about how friends and family and aunts and everybody would come to talk and say, you'll recover soon and you'll be able to play again. And he said, I liked it, but I really got tired of it.
After a while. That's good. He was honest. Yeah, right. And,
and I mean, I think, when you're sick, you really, as you said earlier, sometimes, you're kind of fatigued. So sure. Just being there is good. And,
right.
And most of the time, just enough. Right.
Yeah,
so.
Great. I'm glad that you're doing this series this focus on a connection, because that's what we all need. So,
no question about it. Well, Father Bob, I know it's pretty difficult weather out there, and I know you've got some travel plans coming up. And anyway, we certainly appreciate your time. And
my pleasure, Tom.
Yeah, well, it's great to speak with you. And
wow, what a great interview that was with Father Bob. He was so benevolent and graceful with his time, and we certainly appreciate that. He was right in the middle of a as we all were in the Midwest, a pretty significant storm. So he was just they were just getting ready to cancel some services coming up. But I really liked his idea about when you have somebody that is grieving or sick, and you've maybe been able to encourage them to think about taking that approach, that proactive step to maybe go to some type of support group or whatever it is, whether it's for an illness or for a grief situation. But what a powerful idea that was, is what he said about go with them, right? Whether you physically go or you help to facilitate doing it on their computer, or just whatever way you can help. You don't have to say anything special. You don't have to have a PhD in grief or a PhD in sickness or a medical degree, nothing. I mean, just to be there, just to have that presence and that connection with someone to help them take that active step, right? Which is so important to help facilitate connection, which is what this whole thing's really about. So I appreciate the ideas he had about that. And I thought that dovetailed really nicely with Virginia Chang's discussion about the mortality awareness and the importance of actually thinking on a daily basis about our mortality, which is a given. We can't change that, but we can look at it differently. We don't have to bury our heads in the sand. We don't have to make it a taboo subject or a stigmatized subject like we so often tend to do as a society and as a world on things like that, all types of mental health issues. So I think having that idea in your mind on a daily basis is really fantastic. So again, we dedicated this second broadcast to Ashley Capogreco and her brother Michael Ward, and I certainly know that Michael is a warrior beyond description, and I would not want to be in a fight with this guy because he is tough as nails, and I know he's going to do really well. And his sister Ashley is also amazing, and so we certainly wish them the best and a Merry Christmas and all health and great things moving forward. So we're going to wrap this second of 3 broadcasts up, and then in about 5 minutes, I'm going to restart with the third broadcast. We're going to talk with a lady who works with horses. She's essentially devoted her life to that. She was spent years and years as a therapist, and she's still a therapist, but she does a lot of different types of work with horses, and I think you're going to find that really intriguing. And we're also going to talk to, that's Kit Maxwell. We're going to talk with Joan Brettauer, who is also an end-of-life doula, but she is really more into the nuts and bolts aspect of our mortality awareness and the need for, whether you're 18, 28, 38, 48, to be planning so that when something happens, because we all know it's going to, but so when something happens, it's not a crisis situation for you, for your family members, for your circle, tribe, whatever. And she's got some really great tips and pointers. And so Joan Brettauer and Kit Maxwell will both be on with us in the third and final Christmas Day live stream broadcast. And we certainly are happy to have you on board and look forward to maybe getting a couple minutes to talk more about some of the traditions that have been noted. A couple of them every year, watching Planes, Trains, and Automobiles with Steve Martin and John Candy. That's certainly a classic. And of course, Chevy Chase's Vacation, Christmas Vacation, which is another true classic. It's funny how many movies people list here that are their holiday tradition. And I just think, when I think about that, it leads me to believe that the reason people have that as their primary tradition, or one of the fondest memories that they have about this time of year, is not necessarily just because of the movies, although I have to say there's a lot of amazing movies. I certainly love movies, but it's the fact that there tends to be oftentimes connection around movies, right? I mean, a lot of times you watch movies with family, with friends, and that can certainly create a lot of amazing memories and traditions moving forward. So I appreciate those of you who have been writing in with that. And I'm going to end this broadcast, and we will resume in about 5 minutes, maybe less, maybe 1 minute more, but it will be here shortly. And I think you're going to really enjoy hearing Kit Maxwell and Joan Brettauer talk about those topics. So we will see you back here in